No, no, we're not doing a podcast. I forgot to tell you. It's a video. Sorry.
Oh no, but I'm ready for the podcast.
Hi, welcome to episode 2, Regina District Industry Education Council's Entrepreneurial Spotlight. I am here with a special guest, Shane Chapman, the founder of the Ultimate Deck Shop. Was there a specific moment or time or a moment in your history where you decided you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
I honestly can't think that there's a moment. I think I always knew that I was going to do this. I was going to do something. It just took me like literally 12 years to figure out what that thing was going to be. I was always dabbling. I was always like, I know I want to do my own thing, but what's it going to be? And so coming out of high school, I was like, I was going to get into sports because that was my thing. I liked playing basketball and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. So I went to U of R, took kinesiology. I was like, I don't think this is it. But when I was at university, I started to figure out that I really liked like graphic design. Things were catching my eyes. I'd be like looking at signs and liking that kind of marketing aspect. So I switched up my degree, went into business in marketing. And along the way, it was just like, I really want to be in control of the things I'm doing though. So along the way, I had all these little like side gigs all the time. I'd have a job and a side gig, job and a side gig. But it wasn't until we kind of figured out the idea for the store that like this is really my first like quit your job, take the leap and do it for real without the safety net.
When was that? When did you first do that?
Fall of 2015 is when we made the decision to actually do it. And the store opened in April of 2016.
Wow. So you'd been doing this all along though. You said like your entrepreneurial career would have started in university?
If I could have found like what it was that I wanted to do, I think I would have started a lot earlier. But I dabbled through like running like a Rough Riders fan website. It was kind of the first thing I really maybe like did right. Web hosting, like graphic design, my own little like marketing consultancy, you know, in my living room kind of thing. Marketing consultancy with some other people, with a group of 6 people for a year. Always kind of dabbling, but just never really being like, this is a thing that I should leap out and do on my own for real.
Any advice to, say, a student that doesn't really know either, but also has the same feeling like they want to do their own thing? What would you tell that student?
God, I don't know. I think it's just like get out there and try it all because, like I said, I probably knew from the age of like 19 or 20 that I wanted to own my own business, but it took me until, can I tell my age on here? Is it? Yeah. It took me until like, I don't even know how old I was then, like 34 before I actually did it. And so I feel like I wasted a lot of time, to be quite frank, but I just didn't know what my passion was. And my passions changed. Like at one point I was really passionate about football and the Rough Riders. And then I was passionate about like web design. And then I was passionate about like decking. Like all this stuff came out of nowhere, but it was, you know, finally the decking thing really made me kind of find a business that would kind of align with the passion.
Cool. Starting a company and running a company is never easy. But what do you have to say about culture and building a culture? Obviously, you've been around this long. Your staff seem not to hate you.
They laughed when we came through the door. They're like, you're having a great time over there.
So what I mean, I think you've done a unique thing here. But what's your opinion on culture? Do you have a culture strategy?
A couple of weeks ago, we had a big staff meeting with all of our staff that are around right now. And this came up, this idea of culture. And I had kind of said that like, we've kind of inadvertently fallen into like a decent culture. so no, I don't think it was intentional, but I think what it was is just that Wade and I we're just naturally friendly dudes. Like when we hire people, we want to be we want to be kind of friends with everybody. And I also think that's a dangerous path. You can't just treat your employees and your coworkers as just friends all the time, because that's also probably not going to create like an efficient work environment. So I think there's a fine line there, but at the same time, I don't ever think that Wade and I, for 1 minute, have treated this place with some sort of hierarchy where it's like, you're too far down the totem pole to be coming up to my office. You know what I mean? Just kind of that open door thing a little bit, throwing a ping pong table upstairs, you know, just like sitting around after work and maybe having a drink with the people that work here, whatever. Just like, you're all sharing the same problems and the same success. And I think that we've kind of treated this business as kind of like a bit of a community village. Like we're all here solving the same problems. We'll do it together. Like, you know, I just don't want to create any barriers between myself and anybody. So, I mean, the weirdest thing for me was we opened the store in Saskatoon, and me going there and not having that relationship yet with the employees that are there that are, they work for me, but I don't know them real well because I don't spend every day with them, right? Whereas here it's super relaxed, it's super casual, and I think everybody feels like they're part of the success here, and we all struggle with the struggles.
Yeah. Did you have a moment early on that you realized that it was a good sign you got culture, or it was an important thing to champion in your mind? Was there a sign from, say, an employee or a customer that you took as, oh, we're getting it?
You know, that not yet. Maybe that's happening right now for me, to be honest, because we've got employees now here in Regina and Saskatoon, and they're all going to be here next year. Like they're still here right now. And so for the last few years when the business was smaller, we would lay people off in the winter, or we'd have 1 or 2 people that would stay on over the year, whatever, but there was not a lot of continuity. And then, you know, we had one guy that was with us for a couple of years, and then last Christmas he left. And so, and I don't think it was a culture thing. Like I think he enjoyed it. Life gave him another set of circumstances.
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna understand that now when we can hear from our employees, like, yeah, we like it here. It's like, you do? Like, what is it exactly that makes you like it here? Because I don't know that we're super intentional about it. So I guess, I don't know if I've had that moment, but I think it's happening now where we've got a crew of people from year to year that want to come back. The people we lay off in the winter, they understand that and they come back. Probably a good sign.
So does it come down to, is it respecting people? Like you're very honest about not having a culture strategy, but it feels like you get it. It feels like there is a strategy. And maybe that's just respecting each other, not having the look down your nose at someone when they want to meet with you or ask a question.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. Like, I don't know that, I'm at least not in the business of creating culture as a consultant to other people. I don't know how you create it if you're not naturally like we are. So for me to sit down and be like, here's the things we're gonna do to make sure that everybody's like friendly and happy. I feel like there's a disconnect there. I feel like if you're not a friendly dude, it's hard to fake that. You know what I mean?
So, respect and friendliness.
I totally think it is. I think it is just like being friendly. Like it's pretty rare that Wade and I get too heated up over anybody. And you know, sometimes people make mistakes that cost you a lot of money. And not once have I ever seen Wade or myself blow up on somebody out there. Because everybody, like, we know that they know that was a mistake, and we know that they know that costs us some money, right? But I think it's more of a teaching moment than it is to get super like angry over anything. So that probably helps.
Like right there, like that's a good culture moment.
Yeah. Maybe I should just write down this entire conversation and then we'll have the strategy in front of us.
No, I think it goes back to if we're going to the young entrepreneur that's starting out, it's care about your people, make sure you're being friendly. Yeah. And it sounds like you have a good feedback loop between a partner to let you know if things aren't going that way. But no, that's a really good answer of, we don't have culture, but it's also not a problem. It's kind of the way we live.
Yeah.
What do customers say about your culture?
I don't know. What do you guys do? I don't get too many complaints about our people. So
I don't get too many complaints.
I mean, I think that our customers, especially the contractor side of things, has always appreciated the fact that they can find Wade or I. You know, like, we're not so big. We're not big. We're not so big that they don't know where we are. They still have even they feel a part of it a little bit. And I feel like we've been a bit more intentional about the culture, creating a culture with our contractors, to be honest. That's been a bit more intentional. We, right from day one, have always been like, you know what, it doesn't, just because contractor A is here at the same time as contractor B doesn't mean they need to turn their backs to each other and not speak. Like, I know that they compete, but it's okay. We're all learning here. We're all trying to be successful. We can all be successful. Yeah. There's more than 5 decks to build in Regina. So I think we've tried to embody that a little bit through them and be like, you know what, everybody should be, and again, maybe that just comes back to that Wade and I are just like, not happy-go-lucky, but just like friendly guys. We want everybody to get along, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the customers have seen that in us, and they see that within themselves now too.
That's the new style of business, though. It's competing by collaborating, and it's
right.
I think there was a term we invented which was like collaboration. Yeah. So like collaborate with your competitors. Well, like, what do you have to lose? Are you worried about them?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be.
So I thought it was super cool that just the other day, one of our contractors posted a finished job on Instagram, tagged us because we supplied the materials for it, and tagged other contractors that had come and given him a hand. And these guys were competitors before they both started shopping. Well, they still are. But they shopped at different places. They would have never known each other. But in this instance, this guy needed an extra set of hands, and another contractor came and gave him a hand to installing the stuff he hadn't done before. And then tagged him, was like, thanks to Mike and whatever, right? And then there was actually a third contractor involved, again competing. I think that's like softened over the years as they've gotten used to the fact that and they understand what we're doing, maybe more now. And maybe there's a respect there now that we're still around 5 years later. But we've always embodied that too. If we see a competitor at a trade show, Wade and I have never had a problem like stopping and chatting and doing that. And I know that that's, especially down in the States, is not the vibe I found going there. Like reps down there hate each other if they work at different companies, and up here it's much more friendly.
If you ran into yourself 10 years ago and you wanted to give yourself advice, what do you think you'd tell yourself?
Oh boy.
It's 2010.
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah. I'd probably tell myself to get after it, like to get started on what you're wanting to do, because I feel like I did sit and be not unhappy, but not overly happy with what I was doing. And I was waiting for the opportunity to come find me. And it wasn't until I made just a go, no go, no plan B decision to do it before I actually did it. And so I feel like I wasted a lot of, maybe this could have happened earlier, but I was just a little bit too scared to take that leap.
Go back to that no plan B. Explain that. What do you mean by that?
So I don't particularly like safety nets. So
you hate Cirque du Soleil.
Boring, right? If you can't completely cripple yourself in a mistake, like,
why try?
But I just mean that, like, for the longest time before this, I was working at SaskTel. I had a good job, right? If I wanted to have a career job at a desk with good pension and benefits and just like work my 7.74 hours or whatever it was a day, I had that.
EDOs every other Friday.
Right. And so for probably a couple of years, probably 3 years, every winter I would get antsy and I'd start thinking like, I'm gonna do this. Because I was building decks at the time on the side, and I would think like, this is the year. This year I'm gonna take the leap, and I'm just gonna go do it. And then as it came closer, it was like, it doesn't feel right, not the time. I've got this job, right? Like if I don't do it, look what I've got to fall back on. And so I feel like I didn't take the leap for 3 years in a row, even though I really, really wanted to, because everything was so comfortable behind me. And it wasn't until I actually went to a business partner and said, like, we're gonna book a home show. We're gonna spend the money for the home show so that we have a deadline. We have to be on, and we've invested money into it. And I'm gonna tell my boss I'm quitting the job so that there's no turning back. And so I think the lack of a safety net meant this time I can't get cold feet in February and be like, just one more year. I had to go. I'd already kind of made my bed, right? And so because I do think, like, if you have a plan B, and I'm not saying this is like, obviously having plan Bs in some circumstances is important. I don't know if the home show is going to happen next year. I should have a plan B in case they don't. But in those situations, I think it just like, it makes it too cozy for you. And I think it's too easy to lack the motivation to make something happen if there's an easy second out.
Wow. That's really good advice. It's like, if basically put all your eggs in one basket. If it's a big decision like that, at that point, there's nothing to lose. You have to go for it.
Yeah. Well, and what's the worst that happens? The store doesn't work and I go get another job at SaskTel or somewhere else. Like, it's not, like, it's as scary as it seems, it's not the end of the world, right? If it doesn't work, go get a job.
I just said this like 2 hours ago, the Steve Jobs, looking back, it's easy to connect the dots, but looking forward, it's terrifying to see, well, what's next? But
yeah,
the leap of faith every now and then turns out really well for us.
Yeah.
Tell me about the podcast. When did you start the Ultimate Deck Shop podcast?
When?
Yeah.
It was about 2 years ago, almost to the day.
And how many episodes are you at now?
I believe we just filmed 107. Wow. So it's a weekly podcast, so story checks out, that adds up to just over 2 years.
What's the coolest thing that has come out of the podcast so far for you, either personally or for the company?
Being paid to fly somewhere and do the podcast live, I think was the
cool.
Maybe eye-opening event that happened. I was like, people, like, this is something. This isn't just us sitting behind a mic. People are actually listening to this right now, right?
Where did you go?
Louisville. And so, wow. I mean, let me backtrack and tell the story about why this is cool. Because when we started the podcast, I started the podcast because I listened to a lot of Gary Vee. And I don't know, you probably know him or listen to him, you know how, like, kind of just like, he's very repetitive in what he's telling you, but it's because what you need to do, and people don't like I said, people sit on their laurels for 10 years before they do something, and he's a very much like just go do it kind of guy. And so he was talking a lot about audio at that time, a couple of years ago, saying like audio is the way this thing's going. People are putting Google Homes and Alexa in their houses. At some point, that's going to be the primary media, and which was a really big 180, because we were all talking about how radio was dead, right? How radio is like a dying media, and so it was weird, but at the same time, it made so much sense to me because I'm such a busy guy traveling and like just thinking that I want to do things passively too. I don't want to sit down and watch 3 hours of YouTube, but if I'm driving, I sure want to listen to 3 hours of stuff to keep me going. And so that made sense to me. And I also realized that like a lot of our customers are contractors. They spend a lot of time in vehicles traveling, not necessarily here, but we've got customers that aren't in Regina, they're in bigger cities and they have 40-minute commutes. It's like, well, that's a podcast right there.
Yeah.
And so the medium made sense to me at that point. How to make decking interesting enough to do a podcast was like, I had to learn that yet, but I went up to Wade and was like, I think we're going to start a podcast. It's like, about what? Like, who's going to listen to this podcast? Like, nobody's going to want to listen to how to build a deck in a podcast. It's like, I don't think it's for our customers necessarily. It's not for people building decks. It's like, we're aiming this thing upwards. Like, we're aiming this thing at the distributors and the manufacturers for leverage there. And so it's more of an industry podcast than it is a how-to podcast necessarily, right? And so a lot of our audience is manufacturers, reps, distributors, contractors. We can build leverage when it comes time to purchasing, potentially. If we have brands that like what we're doing, maybe we can use that as some leverage for better purchasing.
For sure.
Maybe we turn this into a thing where we start doing speaking engagements. Like it could be that kind of thing. We build ourselves a brand. And so we started this podcast on a low budget. Dude, we were episode 1 or 2. I feel like it was after the first one, and we got a call from Trex, which is the biggest brand in the industry. Our rep called us and was like, what are you guys, I answered the phone, he literally said, what are you doing? And I was like, I am at work, doing work things. And he's like, no, with this podcast thing. Oh, yeah, we're doing a podcast now. Okay, I just want you to know that my boss in Vancouver called me because his boss, the president of Trex, called him. And I was like, what's going on with these guys in Regina? Who is this? Whose account is this? And so now it's just filtered down. And
the president of the company found the podcast.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Along with our YouTube content at the same time, right, that we were starting to do too. And he's like, my boss called me and was like, who are these guys? How do we find out more about them? And he's like, well, that's my account. Like, I know those guys. Okay, we'll find out how we can get involved. So after one episode, you have the biggest brand in the whole industry saying like, we want to be involved in this thing. And that was the goal, but I didn't think it was going to happen after the first episode, right? I said to Wade, I was like,
God, we should have had a bigger goal.
That's crazy that we're already getting that kind of leverage. And so a few episodes in, we start getting these calls from everybody. All these brands are like, what's going on here? Like, how do we get involved in this? Can we do an episode? And all this kind of stuff. And so we haven't. I didn't want to take any sort of sponsorship or ad dollars for it right away. I wanted to, because I wanted our audience to trust what we were talking about. And so I didn't want it to be influenced or biased anyway. So we didn't do that for a while.
Good for you.
And we still haven't, aside from, there's been some brands who are like, we want to be close to what you're doing here. And so the first big trip was down to Louisville to a big trade show there, and another one of these big brands, these guys were here, Decorators, was like, we want to know if you guys can come down and film the podcast live at the booth to be like an attraction of the trade show, the show. And we're like, yeah, we're going to the show anyway, man. Like, let's go. So
yeah, I haven't booked my flights yet.
Right. So they paid for everything for us to get down there and got all our stuff down there. We set up, they did up these like backdrops. It felt like you're on TSN giving sports interviews because we had like Ultimate Deck podcast. They were promoting it at other booths throughout the show. And they had like big crowds around watching us record these podcasts, whatever. So it's kind of a moment where it was like it really was working at the point, and we are like a brand in itself now.
Yeah. Separate
from the story. Right. So
too cool.
Pretty neat.
And another podcast you started out of it too now, or on the side.
Yeah. So the Deck podcast has gotten to the point now where we actually brought on a contracted guy who helps us out with kind of production of the podcast, and he's entrepreneurial by nature. I am as well. We both like that community. We both like hearing the stories. So him and I were like, hey, all this stuff's just sitting here, getting used once a week. We should use it twice a week. So we started a new podcast that interviews other Saskatchewan-based entrepreneurs to hear their stories, how they started this. But just like, I'm always curious, like how did 22 Fresh start, right? And so I want to hear all those stories of people's struggles and how they dealt with COVID and why they started and all that stuff. And so we were kind of looking for that. It was like, where does this exist? And it's like, it doesn't really. Okay, well, let's do it. And so here we are. Now we're, I don't know, a dozen episodes in on that too.
Too cool. You're a busy guy.
I like to keep myself busy, I would say.
If you're talking to a high school student or teacher, what's the most important, or what's the advice you give most often?
So this just start, I think, is probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I usually give out. My wife is in the situation right now where she's wanting to kind of start her own thing, and she's also paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. And I know that that's what stops so many people. Is like, well, I don't know how to do what I want to do. And so I had never, ever even worked in a lumberyard before. I have no business owning a lumberyard right now. The most I had done was shopped at one. And so I didn't understand what it was going to take either. And I feel like maybe a bit of that, like that naivete was important in doing what we did. But it's just like one step in front of the other, because I think a lot of people look at the end goal and be like, that's what I want to do. And that's overwhelming as all hell. Like, I'm still overwhelmed trying to figure out how we're going to get to what the dream picture looks like. Because you have to understand that, like, Amazon started in a garage, and so did Apple. No big business ever started as a big, like, they were all small businesses first, right? And so it's just like taking one small step towards your goal every day, or every moment, every chance you have to do it, and just like do the next thing in line. Because we look down here, like, it's scary, man, just to look and be like, how do I get there? But we started with nothing. We started with like next to no money in a tiny little shop, and now, like, if I would have said we have to start even 5 years ago where we are now, it probably wouldn't happen. It would have been like, we can't. How can we do that? There's no way we can do that. So I think it's just like, start, take small steps, and just learn. Like, go learn what you need to learn, because it's all out there.
Well, it sounds like don't be afraid to go into an industry you know nothing about, because sometimes that ignorance is the best thing you have going for you.
Yeah, I'm sure that same philosophy has burned a lot of people to try to do things.
Don't know anything about the industry you're going into. Yeah, right? You're right. That could be bad.
I always tell this story though, because this shows how naive I was to this whole thing. So I always tell this story. When Wade and I had decided we were going to do this, start a lumberyard. We were sitting, we would meet up every once in a while and go for drinks at Leo's or whatever, and like talk through some things. Like, what do we got to do? What has to happen here, and here before we open? And at one point, Wade asked me, he's like, what's your biggest hurdle right now? Like, what's the biggest thing that you think we have to figure out before we open the store? And I don't remember what my response was to that, but it was something not a super big deal. And I was like, oh, I don't know where we buy lumber from or something, because we didn't even know that. And I was like, what's yours? He's like, we don't have a forklift. And so how do we unload a semi of stuff? And in that moment, I was like, oh my God. I hadn't even gotten to the part of like, you can't own a lumberyard without a forklift. Well, how are we going to get a forklift? Like, it was just, I was so oblivious to what all the requirements were. So I think like being naive to that and being like, oh no, my next step is to make a logo, or to write down some sort of plan or something. It was like, I was just looking at the small things and checking them off, and wasn't even worrying about the big stuff yet. And that probably did help me get there. So awesome. Blindly so.
Awesome. Thanks so much for today. Yeah, this has been great. Any last shout outs for the podcast, for coworkers, for anybody?
Just take the step, take the leap, find somebody that you can not necessarily even have to mentor under, but like phone me. I'm good, man. If somebody texts me and is like, hey, I want to start a business and I have no idea where to go, like, we're going for coffee. Cool. Right? Like, because I've done that with some of the high school students that I spoke to afterwards. They're like, oh, how do I do this? And it's like, take my number and text me. I love this stuff. So find a way. Just have that attitude of like getting one foot in front of the other and just making it happen. Because if you don't, you're going to regret it. Like, imagine being 55, 65 years old, and instead of waiting for 10 years to do your thing, you just never did it. Like, how happy are you going to be with your life at that point? So people ask me all the time, do you regret ever leaving SaskTel? And it's like, not for a second. Not even in the middle of the pandemic, when I thought we were going under, did I regret making that decision. But it took me how long to make it?
That's really cool.